on Building in Public with Peter from Polywork. Welcome, Peter.
Hey, man.
Also known as @Neo, I see.
As what, sorry?
Is that your user handle of choice, @Neo?
Oh, is that what my user handle generated as, Neo?
Yeah.
That's really obnoxious.
Was that not your choice?
No, oh, wait a second. That might be because when I have a highlighter account from back when it was very different. And so I think it might have been me trying to get like Neo would be way too obnoxious because he's the one. That would be terrible.
I was going to ask because isn't your Twitter handle? I think is like multiplayer with a little bit of a Hacksaws ER.
Yeah. I couldn't get multiplayer with like the three, like putting the three in there.
But it almost sounds like between that and Neo, it almost sounds like there's some thematic, almost like virtual world, maybe Matrix, virtual reality type stuff in your mind. And I think also, kind of maybe on display in some of the iconography and graphics of Polywork. So I wonder sort of, where does that all thread together? And is that kind of a constant, consistent theme for you over time?
Yes, it's funny. So, actually, maybe sort of. When we created Polywork, we kind of had this idea that we would, from a visual perspective, you saw like the earliest visuals were before we even kind of knew what Polywork was like a year ago. And we always wanted to create this idea that at the moment, like professional networks and professional identity in general is just so stuffy and so corporate. And we had this thing in the wall that it's like, okay, cool. If LinkedIn won't do it, we will. And we sort of thought, well, what if we literally created a world? And that started with something so there's definite Matrixy vibes to it, but that's also just like I'm a huge video game player and grew up on playing The Sims and Age of Empires and just have loved video games in general. But I do think but then actually kind of snowballed, and there has become this like we hide little Easter eggs in the graphics. So there's a little Neo on the homepage and things like that. And,
nice.
I think it was just because it's fun. It's fun for the design team to work on some of that stuff. But the multiplayer handle though on my Twitter I got it, which I was surprised at, even though I changed the E to a 3, and then I just ended up getting it on every other platform and have multiplayer.com and kept it consistent. And I think it's kind of it was just a play on the idea for Polywork that you can kind of the whole point of the app eventually is that I played Second Life as a kid relentlessly, and the idea that you could sort of turn up and decide which character you were going to be that day. And I thought that sort of spawned the thinking behind creating Polyworld, which was the whole the characters you see when you come into the app, and the very visceral experience you get when you go through the storytelling on the homepage. And a lot of it was just about, I could be a speaker tonight and a mentor tomorrow and a designer on Friday morning. And so this idea of really playing into the word poly or multi has always been something I've been kind of excited about. I could get really deep and go into the fact that the Matrix is about the path of Neo, and how Polywork is literally about finding your path and what path you're going to go on. But it's not that. It's a little less scientific than just wanting to have a bit of fun with the gaming side of things and sort of the creating a new sort of world for people to kind of come into.
Yeah, it's super fun.
That's awesome. Were you, when I was kind of struck by this very natural idea that we're not one school brand name that we've gone to, or one job title. People are different things at different times in their lives and even different days within their week. The idea of this kind of homepage for all of those different identities, were you seeing people trying to hack that in ways, or how are people kind of using the internet to do this in the cases where they did want to more holistically express themselves? Was it always you have to pretty much build a custom web page, otherwise you're kind of either your LinkedIn self or your Twitter self or your Facebook self? Or what was your thinking around kind of pulling stuff together in the very beginning?
Yeah, it's funny. We got the insight for Polywork from my last company, which was we'd spent so we almost spent 7 years to get that insight, which was this idea that people's identities are super fractional. And I think even more so when the pandemic hit, because people were sat at home, they had a lot more time for side projects or just like actually like trying new hobbies because they were bored out of their minds. And so I think the insight we got in the pandemic when it hit and it accelerated it was one thing, but the more we then, I guess, took a step back, and then once we got it, we were very aware of it. And we looked everywhere from, you could just see Polywork in people's Twitter handles. They're like, oh, I'm a designer at Airbnb, but also a scout investor for Sequoia, a advisor, a mentor. I'm writing a book with my friends. And, the more we looked into Twitter bios, we realized like everyone is literally cramming everything they do into this like 160 characters or whatever it is. And then I think the more we spoke to people, the more we realized how important it was for them to represent the different things together, and how there's been this proliferation of these sort of like link in bio type apps that I guess allow you to consolidate all the links to places, but no one had really, we didn't come at it from that angle. We came at it from more of like, we're trying to solve, we actually don't know what the world does. Like there's no searchable, indexable way to know like, what has Peter actually done in his life, because we're hidden behind that job title, or we have those like different like fractional parts of ourselves. And so people have tried to hack it in literally Twitter bios. They put together websites on Notion. They built, they spent hundreds of hours investing in websites, and it's great. Like those do a great job, and it's good. People can do like visual storytelling, but I think the problem remains is that searching that in any sort of structured way and being able to find that information, like that's, I guess, with the more tech, search Google hat on, is that that's really difficult to do. Like I can't query Twitter bios, and then I can't work out beyond, again, those labels. So it's almost like, I think Polywork wanted to get in there earlier, rather than, when you have one job title on one label, it's hard enough to know what you do. But if you then have 10, it's like the world almost really needs to know, like, what does that actually mean? Not that you all of a sudden are identifying by like 6 different titles, like speaker, mentor, advisor. Like, what have you actually done? And so I think people were hacking it up until, I hope we're going to give people a way to just pull it together into one timeline. Just like, it doesn't matter if it's 9 to 5, freelance, part-time, full-time. It really just comes down to this unit of like, who are you and what did you do at that moment in time? Fingers crossed.
I was also
like
struck by,
okay.
Oh, just real quick on that. I was also struck by, on like your own profile, for example, you have not only like founder, designer, and things like that, but imposter syndrome, failure, things that people, it's not like something that you've done necessarily. It's kind of something that you felt in the past, or something that you have experienced kind of in a different way with. And how are people like using labels like that in your experience, and how did you think about that?
Yeah, so honestly, that's the community, and they inspired me to then put them on my profile. Like my first version of my Polywork profile was really like, I've written for a couple of publications, I've spoken at a ton of events, I'm a designer, and that's kind of it. Like, I'm founder, right? So I maybe had like 4 or 5 different ones. And I think a couple of things happened when we launched Polywork 3 months ago. Like, one was, when we David knows well, DK knows well, it's like, I saw your label and I was like, David, I was like, no, it's DK. What are you talking about? You're talking to DK. I was like, this isn't formal. Like DK, he's been involved with us from like our previous business as well. And, when we decided to reboot things, we made a couple of like decisions, like what would we do differently this time? And one of those big ones was the idea that, like, having, I guess, the confidence to say, okay, well, if the network's successful, what do we want to be true about it? And that one of the big things the whole early Polywork team aligned on was that we wouldn't build systems of stress into the product. And just that we really thought that for there to be an environment where you can truly, freely say who you are and what you've done, we can't make it a popularity contest. So there was going to be no like buttons, no follower counts in the platform. Mm-hmm. And we still have a lot to do to work out, like, well, where are people going to get their dopamine hit from? Like, I get asked that by investors every single day. But importantly, like for us, like values-wise, it was, we're not going to introduce those things to the platform. And I think what that then led to, in combination with the fact that everyone was just stuck at home for a year, frustrated, either out of work looking for new types of work, out of either frustration or necessity or boredom. And I think a combination of not being judged on the platform, so no like buttons, no popularity, and that they have just been expressing themselves in ways I never thought would happen. Like there was literally 180,000 badges added to profiles in our first month of being live in like a private beta. And, you know, then going through them, and we went through that data and just like holy shit, like there's literally, you know, like the imposter syndrome, failure, ADHD. I mean, some of the badges have got kind of wild. I'm not going to mention some of like the more interesting ones, but I think it was because people didn't feel judged. They also, despite, I mean, I asked early users, like, because I had a great chat with a early user called Rich Burrows, and community member. I think it was like one of the first few hundred people on the platform, and he said, I asked like, well, hey, you've been posting a ton of really personal stuff. Like, how come? Like, this is a professional network? And he's like, well, you know, not really. You know, it's like the branding, like it's much more open and welcoming. There's no judgment. And we realized that, and just really like, what is professional identity? And like, kind of like the community inspired us to really think about it in a more extreme way, which is we are, as professionals, we're just people like at work, and we haven't really been able to express those quirks. And I think that's pretty amazing actually to see them do that. So then, I mean, the imposter syndrome on my own profile is just, I grew up in Belfast in the 80s, and I get to chat to you guys. I was a self-taught designer. I worked in a restaurant 10 years ago. It's like, I've just been riddled with it my entire existence. So I like get coached on it a lot, but I think just seeing the community, I think there's like a few hundred people that added that badge to their profile in their first week, and then literally started sharing experiences around their imposter syndrome. I was just like, this is pretty cool. Like I just penned a Medium article on what happened to my last company, and sort of like finally feeling like okay about sharing that it didn't work after 7 years, which is like took its toll on me and the team. But it was a lot of just, I was like, oh, wait a second, everyone's messed shit up, and everyone's like, but that's the whole point, is kind of like the journey. And so I think it all kind of became very meta, because it was just like, as we were pivoting and into this new product, this new tool to enable people to tell their story, I was like, oh shit, I can actually use it to tell mine. And so, yeah, it's been pretty wild. I've actually enjoyed it like almost as like a journaling app. Like we're about to add private posts, and, I've been like enjoying just actually, like I post a lot on Twitter. Like I know DK, you have a huge audience on Twitter, like a lot of people do, but I've really started using Polywork more as a way to just record what's important to me. And because there's no judgment, I'm happy. Like, it's become very, very different, very unique content. Like I literally posted I was spending time with my dog, that I was playing basketball alone. Right. I was able to like add little private notes of like, how I was feeling at the time and stuff. And so, it's been kind of weird. It makes it harder to answer the question when investors are like, so who are you and what is this platform? When I think as of like last week, 45% of the posts are what would be traditionally deemed like a social post. Like someone posted they just had two like twin daughters yesterday, and I was like, that's amazing that stuff's not being enhanced on Polywork, the platform. But very much still like listening and learning as to what that's going to mean for. But just so cool, man. Just like so cool to see like the human posts on the platform. Yeah. Like I would never share that on Twitter, because I'd just be scared of being eviscerated.
How do people think about when they're making a post like this in Polywork? Are they, imagining that other Polywork community members are going to see it? Are they imagining that other people in their kind of concentric professional networks might see it? Are they sending it out on newsletters? Or how do people think about like who is going to see their Polywork stuff?
Yeah, so you can follow people on Polywork. We added that a couple of weeks ago. I think we just hit like 250,000 follows, like 250,000 times people have followed, which it's been pretty interesting. We made a very conscious decision to not show follower counts, because we just didn't, we really don't want people to like optimize their content for sound bites. So it's like, it's like similar to Twitter, but just you don't see a follower count, so there's no stress. So they definitely are posting to that audience for sure. Like it's pretty cool. There are some people with very high, like a very, very, very large followers now when we look at it in the background in the database. But I think it's really interesting, because one of the key product decisions we made with Polywork early was that we were going to let people build on their own custom domain. So you don't have to have like polywork.com/DK.
That's
you can
cool.
just, it was like, it was really the first user experience challenge we decided to solve, which was just takes forever to get set up with a custom domain and then generate an email. And our kind of like, we got it, which was really exciting. There's a lot of people posting like, I've literally got a custom domain in 3 minutes, and like I have this like website now, which is kind of cool, and it's discoverable on the net. Like that was the real value prop in the beginning. But when it comes to publishing and like, who do they think is going to see it? I'm not quite sure yet, actually. I think it's more a case of we're 2 to 3 months in. People are really just using it as their own, almost kind of like their own walled garden on their own domain to kind of store like the information that's important to them. And then because our network is pretty young, I think they're then going to other channels to share it. So like our biggest growth channel right now is just Twitter, because if someone posts something on Polywork that's important to them, they then reshare it on Twitter. It drives signups, and we have a very strong viral coefficient with that. But I think over time we're going to look to, I hope, like we were adding our first big engagement feature in a couple of weeks, which is commenting. You can enable commenting on your posting if you want, and because I think that is one thing that's been missing is our first year for Polywork was very much build a single player mode, that people will be able to set up a website that's discoverable on a network and post what they want, judgment free. Like that was part one. And then we didn't expect the growth that happened like over the last 2 or 3 months. So then it was a lot of like scrambling to get social network and connection type features and, optimize the feed and personalize it for people. But I think, and now we're starting to think a little bit while we go deeper into the single player mode of like, okay, how do we make sure that people can embed their newsletter, and embed their GitHub account to the Polywork profile? I think there's a question of like, how will people engage on other people's posts if there are no likes? And so I say probably the biggest experiment we're doing is releasing commenting. And then I think then the question will be, people will post because they want maybe a discussion around what they're up to, and whether maybe they're sharing an experience with imposter syndrome, and other people can comment and share that experience back. And I think that'll be pretty cool to see what that does to our engagement.
And is that all open kind of? Does the commenting stuff work roughly in an open way like Twitter, or is it more closed in a kind of networked way, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, we're actually out of the box what we're releasing is definitely not a V1. Like it feels like a V2 or 3, because every time we release something, we really think about like the stress on the user. And so we ran a Twitter poll the other day that was interestingly close, but the people that wanted the power to enable or disable comments won out. So we decided we're building in public, which is why we're building in public with you guys. But and so we decided to build that from default, like that setting. Like you can turn comments off or on. You can delete comments on your post. At the end of the day, it's your post, so you can put whatever you want there. So I think we're gonna. I think what's the other thing we got? Oh yes, that's right. We added the ability to only let followers comment on the post as well. So just like thinking a little bit earlier, but rather than just like it's a free for all, everyone can comment on stuff, because then you can run into things where, well, if someone comments and that person's pretty famous, there's quite a few famous people on the platform now, and all of a sudden if anyone can comment on their post, then it's like free advertising on their website, which we kind of need to be really careful about. So I'm nervous about commenting just because I'm enjoying given how intense Twitter can be, and sometimes can be beautiful but also be a little toxic. I'm nervous but excited to introduce commenting in our product.
It seems like the scoping that you're using should give it a very different feel than I think kind of an open Twitter type of comment. So that it seems like a nice way to start it anyway.
Yeah, definitely experiment. I think it's going to be a lot of learnings, just like seeing what sticks, seeing what doesn't.
Yeah.
One of the things that
just on the commenting thing, like even pre-commenting, I was kind of curious. So like, how have people been finding each other or talking to each other so far? Have you noticed interesting ways of them getting around that, even without like direct abilities to comment on someone else's post?
Yeah, so probably the most annoying thing for people was that we didn't have search. I mean, for like the first month and a half of the product's existence. And I mean, honestly, it was because we really were building a single player mode like experience. And so we just added search, which is awesome. So I can search and find people. There's also something we're adding, I think it literally goes out today actually, which is you can now find your Twitter friends. So you can, as of last week, you can opt in through Twitter. But as of today, maybe the latest tomorrow, you can like actually, I think who of my Twitter friends are on here already, which will be massive. But it's kind of interesting. Like we invested very early in like the structure of the data around the platform. And so like, for example, those badges that you picked on your profile, DK, whether it's like investor, founder, reader, cyclist, for example, we're already doing some pretty cool stuff around, like, kind of like similar to TikTok. Like, you don't actually have to follow people on TikTok to have a good time and see good content. And so I just got a preview of like our first version of our personalized feed, which is really cool. And so, like, because I have the founder, mentor, speaker badge, I'm going to be able to see content around like what other founders, mentors, vegans are up to. So I think that's going to be one of the biggest things that drive. Actually, because there's a very heavy investor audience on the platform. It was the first experiment we built last week, which was, okay, what happens if an investor comes onto the platform, literally just picks the investor badge, and that's it? Like, what does their experience look like first time? And it was really cool, actually, because we can start mapping that schema to know that, like, look, for the most part, we know that investors are interested in what everyone else is investing in, or which founders are fundraising, which founders are like launching new features, building cool stuff. And it was pretty neat. Like, we masqueraded in as an investor and saw, like, wow, this feed is, I mean, because less than 2 months ago, the feed, I mean, because because Polywork is horizontal by default, like, you had like an investor coming in and putting like the sneakerhead badge in their profile. And then you had like an engineer from Arkansas putting the sneakerhead badge in her profile. And all of a sudden you got this like wildly like horizontal schema immediately, like from day one almost, of like, wow, there aren't really verticals on Polywork. Like, how do we make sure that we use this like data in a way that can like inform the experience? And so I think the personalization is going to be, like, if we can get that right, I hope we can keep people off Polywork, honestly, and just like give them a digest and say, like, here's the coolest things founders that we like are up to, or here's the coolest thing other cyclists are up to, for example. And rather than, we don't have to kind of like work back from an unstructured, messy, big network. We kind of like structured it day one so we could do some of that cool discovery stuff.
That's great. One of the things you touched on briefly, but I've found kind of most fascinating about the product choices, and I think is like very fresh, and I'd love to hear more about sort of the thinking here, is you know, the fact that you can actually manage a social network domain, a socially networked identity on an external domain is like a really big deal in my mind. And I don't know how much people focus on that when thinking about Polywork, but I think, at least in my mind, it seems like almost like, such a fresh idea that we just haven't seen. We've seen things like, WordPress or Ghost, where you can set up a blog, and those are usually kind of isolated, and there's the old school blog rings and stuff. But then, like, in a socially networked world, like, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, etc., everything's contained within that domain, and you can't really break out of that and own the endpoint, own the space and the visuals, and really kind of make it your own. Whereas in Polywork, you really can. So I wonder, like, how much of that is really core, and do you expect you'll double down on that more over time, or is that kind of like early, super passionate user, maybe like geeks who are really into it, but ultimately it needs to be more accessible for people to really get into it? How do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think honestly, in a nutshell, that is our product. Like, and so it comes from a couple of places. One is, like, it came back to that conversation of, okay, if this network actually works, what should it look like in the future? And the immediate decision we made was that it won't be a walled garden. And I know this will be met with like varying degrees of like positivity and negativity as I like say this, but because I think, the best intentions start well, but I just don't think that the world has much energy left for massive behemoth walled gardens that literally force users to advertise themselves in order to communicate. Like, so for example, you need like 4 artifacts to exist on the internet. You need an email address, a web address, like dk.com, info@dk.com. You need the front end of your website, and you need the SEO. And it's expensive. So, and if you break that down, really, it's really expensive and hard to set up like an email and a domain. It's just like most of us that work outside of tech just don't have a clue how to do it, or a kind of like, and I say this coming from a very different world, but just can't afford it genuinely. I mean, I had to literally like save up for my first domain when I was like 16 years old. And so, like that, I think we wanted to like genuinely democratize access to that. Like, you should, I mean, it's 2021. Like, you should be able to come online, have a email address that isn't at facebook.com, at gmail.com, at aol.com. I mean, you literally are branded by these internet giants the second you exist on the internet. And we wanted to do it differently. And I think the second thing is that the reason those networks are all walled gardens is because they're advertising, right? It's like they want their business models. I think that those networks, I just don't know. I just think that I think that the world is tired of the first generation of those networks and how closed off they are and what they do to our data. And I think that empowering people to exist in their own domain and giving them much more control over their user data and where that goes is the only way like a new network will survive and will thrive, honestly. Like, no, it's not just sort of surviving. I just don't think that another like walled garden is going to make sense. And I'm very hesitant to throw out words like decentralized and, you know, the kind of all the buzzwords of the day. Right. But I do believe that like the next big network like Polywork has to be empowering people to like identify whatever way they want on their own terms, not have to like go to polywork.com to do that. And so we actually, I mean, that technical challenge, like there's a couple of companies that tried it before and like Field had to like flip flop on it, like medium.com enabled your own domain for a while. Like it's pretty hard. Like that was our first 6 months of building, was like making sure that we could actually do that in a scalable way. And really excitingly, I can announce it here. It's cool. We don't let you purchase domains yet on Polywork. You've got to do it on a third party platform, but we will be enabling purchase this quarter, which is really cool. Great. And very, very low cost. So pretty much you can come in, pick a domain, pick a username, and then plug and play a website within like 1 minute, discoverable on a network. Wow. And that was like our big user experience focus for the year. And actually, I think that's our product. Like, I think we don't talk, I mean, we're like 3 months in the wild. Like we don't talk a ton about the bigger strategy behind it, but I do truly believe that the next Facebook/LinkedIn has to be decentralized to an extent on people's own custom domains. It's easy to say that, easy to enable it. I think what really comes with it is the underlying, like giving people control over like when they connect to the network, what they can do with their data. I think up until now, the world has kind of got away with like the social network giants of the world have kind of got away with it being the Wild West when it comes to like people's, like I said, people are branded and they take your data. And I don't think that's going to last. I think in 10 years, I just don't think that's going to last.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's cool. So that's a pretty cool thing, is you're going to be able to simplify the user experience, because a lot of people don't know how to get domains, or, you know, even I have a few redirects, but I've screwed up my DNS records and pasted the screwed up link that is no longer renders, but that's my fault. That's not your fault. But
no worries.
But I think actually just simplifying that process would open it up to, you know, orders of magnitude more people. And I think actually giving people that sort of ownership of that endpoint that is, you know, just a DNS entry instead of sort of an entry in sort of a database of a private company is a super, super like profound idea that I don't think we've really seen. I think we've seen people talk about like, oh, blockchain this and crypto that, but like this actually does it. This, you know, it's not decentralized in the way that those projects just hope to, you know, or kind of narratively talk about. But I think this actually is a nice mix of a UX that works with decentralization principles underlying it. I wonder, like, when you know, you talk about sort of Polywork being a brand of helping people think about like all the different things that make up their identity, and then you think about these like domains as a place to host them. They feel like there's like a couple different messages that may appeal to different people. And I wonder, does it feel like people enter through one gate and then adopt the other, or vice versa? Or how does that look?
Yeah, I think it's like, it's interesting because when we started and trademarked Polywork, we kind of wanted to introduce it to the world more as like a trend, like the verb rather than like the company name. And that was why we got a lot of the coverage on like Good Morning America. And it really, because it, you know, I think it was the first time that anyone outside of like the gig economy and freelance economy had heard a term that also related to them. Like they were full-time people at, you know, Google, SpaceX, Airbnb that did a lot of stuff on the side, or a lot of stuff day to day that they didn't identify with like the freelance community or the gig community. And so a big part of it was introducing that as like independent of what our company does. Like, yes, it happens to be our company name, our product name. We just wanted to show people the work, like your path could be different. And that was like the whole point. Like it could be as colorful as you want it to be, like the multiplayer thing. And I think the way I hopefully sort of see it working is, you know, the product is free and will always be free. And in that case, you get poly.work/DK, or you get polywork.com, or we actually just acquired poly.me, which was an arm and a leg, but excitingly another cool short domain. And so, and that's like that. It'll be free. But if you want to hook up a custom domain, I mean, we literally couldn't give that away for free. Like there are pretty much like 2 inventory providers that provide all identification and naming infrastructure for like every provider, from Google Domains to GoDaddy. And so, you know, we are brokering a partnership with them at the moment, but they pass on a cost. Therefore, we will have to pass on a cost to the user. And while we will keep it incredibly low because we're not trying to make revenue off of a domain business, I do think that the trade-off is as simple as like your Polywork or poly.me short domains are free. But if you want to move on to like a premium version of our platform, whether it's like more custom templates for your website or your own custom domain or whatever it might be, that will cost. And so, yeah, and it's because it is kind of a bit of a paradox because people love the Polywork brand so far, and I think there's definitely, we're riding like the anti-LinkedIn rhetoric for sure. You know, like people have been very frustrated with that for years, and so maybe that's less to do with us and more to do with the current alternative is not very kind and opening. But I think long term, I think the Polywork brand will matter less. I think if we introduce the trend to the world, we'll have done a good thing as a business and like as people to like say like you can work on different stuff and maybe it doesn't have to be as like monotonous as like it once was. But then I think it's just, I'd rather us be like the underlying technology behind how people how people exist online and how they connect online. So really like a social network without a social network is that we should just be like, we basically want to be like the social connection and identity blocks of the internet. Like that's kind of the bigger vision of Polywork is that, and we just happened to start it with our first product as a consumer network to enable like self-expression and discovery. But I think the commitment early to like not having to go back in 2 to 3 years and completely refactor every API we build, like the entire platform, so that we can now enable custom domains. Like we invested very heavily early in structured data in breaking down the barriers to like connecting a custom domain and stuff like that.
And how does it look? I know you're kind of early in the process of kind of building a new type of publishing network, so it's probably early to talk about really what the business is. But I think you're coming out pretty staunchly against an advertising model and kind of one that's based on user data. And there's already some maybe credit card on file with some domain purchasing. So I wonder, do you feel like there's like a direct feature, premium feature relationship that you'll build with end users over time, or do you have sort of other ideas around how the business may work at larger scale?
Yeah, it comes back to like the first principles we set when we decided to like, because I mentioned like Polywork's kind of 8 years old. It's like, even though we've been building it for a year and a little bit, it's nearly approaching a decade, which is wild to say out loud. But it comes back to those first principles. Like the first one being like NOSOS, so no systems of stress in the product. So it won't be a popularity contest. It won't be anxiety inducing. And the second one was just like no friction. And what we meant by that, we didn't, it's kind of double-ended. Like we meant it from both the, like, there'll be no user experience friction. So we wanted to break down a lot of barriers to like, for getting a domain, getting a website, etc. But what we really meant by no friction was that existing professional networks and marketplaces. So like if you maybe take a step back, like human capital connects today online, and there's a lot of friction, and a lot of it is like unintended, and a lot of it is very directly intended. Like for example, the 2 largest human capital marketplaces in the world are Fiverr and Upwork that were digitized, and it makes total sense that those were the first 2 marketplaces that went online because there's a lower barrier to purchasing cheaper goods, like $5 logos, data entry, and versus like purchasing like $100,000 marketing campaign. Like you need a lot more due diligence. There just isn't the reputation and data layer online of human capital to make those purchases in a digital way. And so when we think about that, and similarly maybe LinkedIn even as well. So LinkedIn, their data, we just met, I can endorse you for whatever I want, which means the relationship, you're going to be a first degree connection. I'm going to endorse you for cupcake baking. I have no idea if you're good at making cupcakes, and we haven't done that. We haven't baked cupcakes together. And so in a very simple way, the internet, like the largest repository of professional information is unreliable and untrustworthy at best. And so when we think about like a premium product, what LinkedIn did was effectively charge recruiters to get access to like more data. And then when the recruiters sift through it, the recruiter charges the client the 30%. And so LinkedIn left a lot of that on the table as a business, but also it just introduced this friction. It introduced this like 6 to 12 week interview process to work out based on the fake information or untrustworthy information on a profile, or just lack of information. I'm not saying everyone lies on their LinkedIn profile, but if we don't know, if you look at a LinkedIn profile and you don't know what they use the skills for, and like what did they actually do with those skills? Like, did they actually go to Harvard or University of Ulster or wherever the person went? Once the recruiter sifts through all of that, but that is literally by definition friction. So, but because that's their revenue stream, there is zero motivation for them to clean that up because the recruiters are continually willing to pay to get access to that. Then once they organize it in a way that is decipherable and a little more digestible by the end consumer, then they make the connection. And so when I say like, we will never monetize friction, I mean that we will never introduce a middle person or middle entity that will be the connection between people. Our hope is that I just think I don't think it's very creative. I also don't think advertising is very creative. Like, I think when you build a good, healthy company, I think there are far more creative and ways to monetize that can help people. So a long-winded way of saying we have like the very strong first principles and we will never monetize friction. And that means that we will never introduce a take rate like marketplaces do. So like, oh, you can connect with this person and work with them if you give us 30%. It's like, they're your services. Like, it's absolutely savage that those companies would do that. And then secondly, never introduce middle persons or middle entities like the recruiters. What we are focusing on is, like I said, you can get a free website, discoverable on our network, easier to set up. Like, that's kind of the value add. But if you want premium templates, if you want to be able to customize the single player mode, the website experience as much as you possibly want, we will probably charge for a premium version of that profile. If you want to connect your own custom domain, we will have to pass on a charge for that. And I just think that there are going to be lots of business models if we have this like much more intelligent data layer around what people can actually do. I think that's a time machine in terms of a search engine. And so rather than giving it all to recruiters, you could literally give it to an employer and say, well, what if you wanted to search very explicitly for someone that has done all of these things before? Like, we could literally tell you that they're a match like instantly for the project and like a good culture fit. And I think that we will focus on monetizing in lots of those ways. And I kind of leave again, I'm not saying that we might not let a company post a job ad on the platform. Like, that's technically a form of advertising. But I just think this idea of following people's data around the internet for the purpose of getting them to buy more Pepsi is not that creative.
Right. Yeah, agreed. I think there's a lot more new and interesting things. And I think actually the fact that you can it's easier to more directly transact today than it was when a lot of these companies grew up. With payment platforms like Stripe and stuff, you actually can use those to your advantage to build something kind of more creative and unique instead of just sort of the boring the boring advertising stuff that's also not super aligned with people's needs and users' needs anyway.
Yeah, I think what you said is actually the key to it. Like, there's an element of these older platforms had no choice but to monetize that way. But you're right in the sense that the creator economy, the tools to like get set up and run your own billing and invoicing and payments is far greater now. And so like a network that could potentially enable that too is, I think, like in a more direct way, I think is like much more aligned with our philosophy of just like people should be able to connect with people. Like, let's start to remove, because like if that happens, then the world's more productive. Projects happen quicker, for example. And so, yeah, I think you're totally right. I mean, Stripe literally being the company that can, like, it's like the underlying payments layer. Like, the fact that you can plug and play that in a couple of lines of code, I mean, literally means that if we added that, all of a sudden people can now start billing, like same way Clubhouse did, right? Like, creators could start billing like with like a couple of clicks through Clubhouse. Yeah, I think that'll be huge. I think it's something we could also do, just given there's a lot more intentionality around like what someone has done before on our platform. So now you can kind of tell they're a much stronger potential match for like a project, whether it's like literally mentoring or speaking at an event or working full-time somewhere. It's like, if you know it's a better match, you can cut straight to the transaction rather than this like 6-week long offline process.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I like the idea, of being able to buy premium templates and being able to have like a much more customized experience, just as the person who has a direct relationship with, as a kind of user member of Polywork. I have a direct relationship with the company, and the company serves my needs because I pay for them. So I pay for a better template, same way I might have historically paid, WordPress or Ghost or kind of a blogging service or website creator. It feels just like a really healthy relationship where the expectation is clear. Everybody understands why you're doing it. There's real value exchange directly between the parties. Just seems like a really healthy way for the future to work.
So it's also much more, again, like I just think the people today have, and I personally have like a lot higher expectations for what bigger platforms are going to do with my data. And if we can tell users that we're actually not going to do anything with it, like other than help you get, like explore new opportunities, like I'm being flippant when I say like, we're not going to use it to like, to sell more Pepsi, but that's kind of it. Like we're not. It's like maybe based on your historic path, we could show you some other really cool opportunities that you could do. Like, did you, like, for example, I think you saw the tweet the other day, like LinkedIn suggested I should be the co-founder of legal support for chickens, some organization in like Philadelphia. Chicken, I'm actually vegan. So like, I'm a super proponent for chickens, but I don't want the gig, and so, but if I was given the option to plug into, a platform that said, look, here's how we're going to use your data. If you want to connect to us, we're going to use it to find you an alternative path. Like you could actually, did you know that people like you have authored books? Did you know that people like you have went on to become speakers, and that could bring you more income? And like actually give users like the option and the choice. I could be wrong. I've been wrong a lot of times before, like last company, case in point. But I think in 20 years, there's just no way that it isn't given to people and users as a necessity. That the minute you sign up to any service, you're in complete control of all of your data, and you can choose how to interact. And you're starting to see that a little bit now with like the stuff that Apple is doing, like, and whether those are for political moves or not, like I'm sure, but at least it's a step. I actually do think it's a step in the right direction. That it's kind of like, how do you want to control your data? And those device players will have like all the power for a while, but eventually, I think if we can put it in the hands of the user, and they say, "Oh, I'm going to connect to this platform. What are you going to do with my data?" And be very open, very clear, and not obfuscated to the point at which people don't actually know what's going on.
Yeah, that sounds like really powerful for people like job searching as well, because oftentimes like, if you have too clear an idea for what to look for, it's not the best thing. But if you're totally like, I don't know who to talk to, I want to make a career shift, what should I do? If there could be a platform that was like, as you said, people like you often like talking to these kinds of profiles. And I also really liked the feed where it says like people are open to mentoring or advising companies. And it seems like there's so many ways you can like search and slice and dice different profiles and tags people give each other and themselves.
It's funny about the career. That's literally why we built those 3D assistants. So you pick the assistant when you come in, because the whole point was that we would let users, ideally once you're set up, kind of like, there is like a very, we don't communicate it as much because like we're still working out how to communicate ourselves from a product marketing perspective, but the importance of establishing who you are and what you've done in the platform is so we can then bring you new opportunities. And so you pick an assistant, so you don't have to log into the app. You can just opt in to, we'll text you on a Friday morning and say, hey, you've done these things before. You said you're open to guest lecturing. Here's some genuine opportunities based on other people that have said they're looking for guest lecturers. And the idea with that 3D assistant, the idea is that 3D assistant will become like your little career assistant, and people to introduce you to stuff. Or DK, you can say, I'm open to investing in, seed, Series A, Series B tech companies in the bio space, for example. And then the assistant will literally bring you those on a Friday morning for your coffee, so that you don't have to go like filter, like, how do I get these opportunities? Like, where do I find them? And that's that's a big part of like the connection career piece for me that's missing, right? When you like come out of school in Belfast in like 2009 and they're like, I'm like, so what now? They're like, get a job. I think literally that it was those words, like, get a job. Like there was no further instruction. and then you go online, and it's just like what I think there's the equivalent of like career pamphlets online. It's just like but like, and then you end up like, pissing away your 20s, like going through jobs, wondering like, should I be I started my job in a restaurant in 2009, then became a PR professional because I did a public relations degree after dropping out of computer science, and self-taught designer. It's just like, God, like how much more efficient would it have been if I'd had help, and just like could have got there by 23, not 33. So there's a lot of thought as to like how those assistants come into play. It's just not entirely obvious at the moment. People just either love them or make fun of them on Twitter, which I'm enjoying listening to.
That's cool. Well, I like overall the fact that you've taken a lot of, I'd say, like opinionated perspectives as you've built Polywork. So there's everything from like the decentralized nature, the non-advertising nature, the fun nature, almost like the VR thematic visuals. So I wonder if, there's certain aspects of that when you think about, as you're building out the team, what kinds of things typically resonate or attract people to the team so far, and what do you expect, you'd want to communicate as sort of the lead when you're meeting new people who might want to join Polywork to work on it with you?
Yeah, I think the main thing is that, first of all, like access to opportunities is not equal. And I think like that's the biggest thing that we pitch people on, is that I'm going to requote Scott Belsky. I always give him credit for this because it sounds really good, but he said it when he invested in our seed round, and was that like your school and your job title are not the right proxies for your potential. And so I think that the biggest pitch for us when we think about who we want to come work for us is that people are passionate about enabling professionals and just people to storytell in an alternative way beyond those labels. And that if they can do that in a discoverable way, it would lead them to potentially new opportunities. Like I think that's like the big mission part, because then ultimately the world becomes more productive. Like if everyone can like get on like a potentially better path like earlier in their careers. And so I think that's the big one, is just kind of like breaking down the shackles of those job titles and schools and enabling people to tell their story. And then I think probably the second one is more just that we actually just hired a senior engineer. I think he's based in Washington, who I was explaining to him a little bit of the philosophy behind like just like the no systems of stress and like the not being willing to monetize through like friction. Like we wouldn't monetize friction, but becoming like the middle entity or the connector. And I think his reply in his first week was like, if I could plus one this comment like 50 times, I would. And so I think that's like a big appeal too, is just that like, I think the time is up for future networks to like not be incredibly intentional about the experience they build, its impact on people, their feelings, like its inclusivity from day one. And so I think that's another big pitch we put out there, that if you want to come build like a pretty human network, we're gonna fuck tons up, but like we're gonna try, and we're gonna be super thoughtful about it. From like to your point, like we had a lot of time to think about this network because it's 8 years old. So I think those are the two biggest things. And then just people that are like, when I pitched the team on joining I pitched them on putting 3D assistants in version 1. They were just like, "You're high, man. Like that's not V1. There's not V1 functionality. We're not going to do that." And I think, and I sort of, they say like, no one else would do this. And I was like, that's kind of the point. It's like, we take our time a little bit more with features because we have to be a little bit more thoughtful. We want to be a little bit more thoughtful, but also we want to have like super fun, like creative, like a lot of creativity with those. And so, yeah, anyone that just kind of wants to come in, create ideas and think like maybe no other company would go for this, there's a good chance we probably will. Because, why not? Like, we can still try stuff. Just because like stuff has been done one way for like a century doesn't mean that's the way you should do it. So
and so I know we're actually reaching toward the end of the hour, but I did want to learn I did want to learn more about sort of what the team looks like today, and if there are like specific roles that you have that you're specifically focused on hiring for. Sort of what's the sort of next stage of expansion look like for you?
Yeah, so the next, we are driving as fast as we possibly can towards 1 million activities a month. So that's kind of like our North Star. milestone. We think we will get there by like September, we hope. And yeah, I mean, really, it's just it's a bit of everything. But what I would say is we're hiring designers. We're very heavily skewed with 3D illustrators, designers. Like we spend an inordinate amount of time on user experience. So anyone that's excited.
What does the current design team look like? Is there a little bit of a structure or kind of roles right now?
Yeah. So I'm the head of design. We have a head of product, and then we have an iOS designer and 2 product designers, and we also have a 3D illustrator. So of the 15-person company, 33, a third of us are designers, which is pretty heavy. And so we're hiring another two product designers, another 2 senior product designers. I know that's very heavy on design, but it's just like it really does take time to like building good design. It's super underestimated and underappreciated, I think, in the world. But so two new designers, and then we're always hiring Rails engineers. So we're looking for a few more of those, an iOS engineer, and then actually on the more kind of community side of things, we're hiring a head of customer support and head of community. With all of the great stuff we talked about today, when you end up going from like no users to a ton, you end up with all sorts of interesting support and moderation challenges is the politest way I would put it. So we're hiring a number of support.
Adding comments will not slow that down, right?
Yeah, we would have to have an entire highlighter on the challenges that the team has faced on just the moderation, and not on our platform, because you literally like can't really. There's been a little bit of it, but on our Twitter, that platform has both become our the greatest tool for our growth, but also it's like people have extreme opinions of what we should or shouldn't do as a 3-month-old company, and we just have to I've been policing it very, very heavily just to make sure our team is kind of safe and well. So a few community and a few customer support hires are going to go a long way, I think, to helping us build the community in the right way.
And is the company all co-located or going to be co-located, or a few HQ hubs, or totally distributed, or how do you think about sort of the new world?
Yeah, I mean, I got the idea. They got the idea from you, man. I still remember our ramen in San Francisco a couple of years ago. You were exploring doing a completely remote when I had split my last company between London and San Francisco. Yeah, we were totally distributed. And actually, I love it. We're definitely benefiting from the fact that we're small, and most of the company is my previous company. I hired back probably the 6 or 7 kind of strongest people from that. And they were all strong, all amazing, but went back for the people that were more suited to a consumer environment. And so, yeah, we've ended up with people in, Berlin, Madrid, London, UK, South Londrina, Mexico City. There's definitely a little hub in New York because I live in New York, and so we've ended up with, I think, 4 of the 15 of us are either in New Jersey or New York, but we really don't mind. I think the only thing we might struggle with right now is probably to work with the Asian time zone. We have a number of investors in Singapore and Australia, and that's proven pretty tough to align with schedules. I usually end up doing 10 p.m. or 10 a.m. calls with them. And so I think in general, as long as it's around the European time zone or the north, east or west coast time zones, we're pretty happy to hire people from wherever.
Cool. And how do people usually find out about Polywork and the roles? Is there a job posting, or you post about it on Polywork? Or
I think people just go to poly.blog. We post all of our open roles on our own blog.
Oh, cool! I'll just share it there. Oh
crap! I just realized I gotta jump in a second too.
Oh yeah.
I'm on a women in business clubhouse panel, which is going to be much more intense because it's live. It's live. As in I know this is live, but it's it's got people. But this was so fun. Cool. I mean, obviously you've known the entire history, man, but this was the best discussion I've had about it because the questions were so relevant.
Thank you for joining us. I mean,
no, my God,
we love to hear all the real details and kind of your whole founder journey and the whole thought process around it all. So it's super, super special to us to get to hear the real story, and we'll share that.
No, I was going to say this, like if we were allowed to reshare this stuff too, these will be like this is the first time we've documented any of this. So these will be like the best sound bites we probably have on the community, on like what's happened and what we're up to. So I swear, like we could probably convert this into a deck, and it would be the only deck we actually have that talks about what we're doing, what our bigger vision is. That investors right now just seem to keep looking at the numbers and they're like, oh, cool. Well, they'll ignore your retention for now because you're so young. But yeah, I mean, just, yeah, let me know. We'd love to. Somehow we ended up also with like 15,000 followers on our Twitter in the last like month. So I'm happy to promote it as well on our company Twitter. I don't have any followers on Twitter, but I'll definitely send it out to the few that I do.
Great, yeah. We'll get some highlights up and yeah. Okay.
Amazing.
Thanks,
Thank
Peter.
you so much. And DK, we'll catch up in a little bit. I'm excited to see this stuff.
Yeah, let's do. Yeah.
Yeah.